There are several Fire Emblem games in which we get to see alternate timelines of familiar events, like in Fates, Three Houses, and really just the entire existence of Three Hopes. But what if we took that idea and applied it to the real world? What if, throughout the history of the series, things had gone different? What would the state of the franchise or particular games have been like in that case? Well, that's what I want to look at today, as we're diving into what I consider the three big what-ifs that I most often see discussed in fan circles. And we start with probably the biggest what-if of them all. What if series creator Shozo Kaga never left Intelligent Systems? Shortly before the release of Thracia 776, all the way back in 1990, he left IS to form his own company, meaning that the Binding Blade is the first Fire Emblem game made without his involvement, and I think it definitely shows. Kaga's vision for the series was clear. He had an immense passion for military tactics and history. He viewed the Fire Emblem world as one with connections that Binding Blade broke, and Kaga believed firmly in a storytelling style that integrated story and gameplay, even if that sometimes led to a worse experience for the player. In a way, you could describe Kaga as a purist, someone who had a very clear idea of what Fire Emblem was and should be, and you can definitely ask yourself whether the games that followed after he left would be up to his own personal standard had he still been around. What makes giving any insight into this hypothetical question even more difficult is that for the first few games that followed after he left, it looked like it was actually spelling Fire Emblem's demise. The Blazing Blade sold well, due to it being the first worldwide release of course, but with the release of the Tellius games and the DS remakes, sales were quickly running back, until eventually the point came that Awakening propelled the series to a new level. But that happened more than a decade after Kaga left, with 7 games in between. And purely looking at what we know about Kaga, it's indeed not likely he would have gone all in on supports like Awakening did, or introduced an avatar to represent the player. Those don't feel like elements that fit his values. More questionable are Awakening's decisions to switch to a more modern anime style. Kaga is definitely of a different era. It's hard to say whether he would have made the call to switch art styles for Awakening towards something pretty contemporary. After all, you have to remember this man released a game on the SNES the same year the GameCube was announced. He was many things, but not necessarily someone who could be forced into what most would consider smart business decisions. Now, I'm not trying to make this video an intensive analysis of the subject of the question rather than the question itself, so I'm not gonna focus too much on my opinion when I say that another thing that really stands out from pre-Kaga compared to post-Kaga, even after he had just left, is that Kaga was way more of an experimenter. Compared to the earlier 5 games, all 3 GBA titles are very by the books. They all follow the same blueprint essentially, something that was basically unthinkable under Kaga. As in, from the moment Fire Emblem was more than 1 game old, it was already undergoing heavy experimentation in the form of Gaiden. And not only can I not see Kaga ever making 3 games in a row that are mechanically as similar as the GBA titles are, they are also in many ways downgraded versions from what came before. More accessible, less bloated with complicated features that wouldn't exactly make it newcomer friendly. Kaga wasn't about that life. I cannot see a world in which he would have made the Binding Blade and would have cut skills, for example, something he introduced in Genealogy for extra depth and has stayed around for Thracia. From that aspect, he may have very much approved of Awakening, but that's besides the point. Let's get back to the actual question at hand here. What would Fire Emblem be like if Kaga never left? And to that I say, I suspect that especially the 3 GBA games would have been more feature-rich, with more complicated and intertwined stories, and yet they would have probably sold a lot less. I mean, Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn are games I suspect Kaga would really approve of. They have plenty of his hallmarks and they sold poorly. Becoming more accessible, and to put it bluntly, simple, is exactly what Fire Emblem needed going into the GBA era, with it now not only being on handhelds, but also taking the series across the globe to a whole new audience. Now, I know some fans are willing to go as far as to say that had Kaga not left, Fire Emblem would be dead by now, presumably inspired by how it already nearly died, despite the GBA games doing pretty well still. I don't think it would have gone that badly though. Kaga's vision is inherently not a problem, even if it does position the series as more niche than has in real life proven to be necessary. It's also important to remember that Kaga is of the same generation as someone like Shigeru Miyamoto, who may still often appear to talk about Nintendo stuff, but hasn't actively made a game anymore in a very long time. He has been a supervisor on plenty of projects, but the last game he directed himself was Ocarina of Time. That's how far back this goes. Which means that Kaga already outlasted him as far as game directing goes, but seeing as after going independent he only continued working until his semi-retirement in 2005, it's definitely not simply said that he would have just continued on. While I do suspect that he would have worked on for a longer period than that had he remained in control of the Fire Emblem series, there is no reason to suggest he would have still be hands-on involved at the time Awakening rolled around, meaning that it's entirely possible that in an alternate universe where Kaga never left, Awakening still ended up saving the series, as is often repeated. Which leads me into the second what if. What if Fire Emblem Awakening sold less? It is one of the biggest misunderstandings in the entire fan community. Did Awakening save the series? Well, yes, but it did quite a bit more than that. While we don't know the exact numbers IS and Nintendo were shooting for, it is known that Awakening overshot that several times over. As such, it didn't just save the series, it showed that there was even potential for it to be much bigger, a promise which Fates and Three Houses have absolutely delivered on. I mean, Three Houses is the best-selling tactical RPG game of all time. The series is the face of the genre right now. And that is for a huge part due to the trajectory that was started by Awakening. But what if Awakening sold less? Not so little it didn't meet its goals, by the way, otherwise the answer is simple, Fire Emblem would be dead. According to an Iwata Ass interview, the bags had already been packed, until their sales guy suddenly told them to make another game. What I mean is, what if Awakening did reach its targets, warranting another game, but did not hit the 2 million plus it eventually did? It sounds like a minor thing, maybe, but do not underestimate the effect the success of Awakening has had on basically every game that followed after it. The way it ended up being a perfect storm caused IS to bring back more or less everything Awakening did in Fates, down to the child units being added in the most forced way possible. But had Awakening not been such a slam dunk, I wouldn't be surprised if IS had started a bit of a run of experiments to see what exactly it was that made people gravitate towards this game so much. Maybe Fates would have had a different art style but kept the kids, or kept the art style but scrapped the avatar, keep the avatar, scrap the sandbox style unit min-maxing. It's hard to say which combo they would have started with, but I don't think everything from Awakening that was now directly lifted to Fates would have also been there if Awakening hadn't done as well as it did. Same thing with if Fates had underperformed. I'm not so sure if Three Houses would then have had its separated story structure. But if we zoom in a little closer to what Awakening did, I think there are some elements you can theorize were probably more likely to have returned than others. For example, I am confident the reason that every Fire Emblem game since has had an avatar is because of the success of Robin, but this was not a new experiment at the time. Mark and Chris already existed, so it stands to reason that IS would have probably tried this again if they felt it was appropriate. Child units are the opposite. Yeah, Genealogy has them too, but that's an entirely different time. There is no way in hell Fates would have had a second generation if Awakening didn't massively benefit from its more dating sim elements. In hindsight, it would have actually been an interesting path to see IS take, because the way it stands now, no one seems to really know why Awakening of all games happened to be the success that it did, assuming you need to point out one or two factors. It's all theories, all ideas that could very well be true, but the fact is that we don't know for certain. I personally think the art style, for example, played an enormous role, an often underestimated one, but I can't support that with proof beyond suspicions and the general opinion at the time. Had IS been forced to, for lack of a better word, not just copy most of Awakening's elements, but been more picky in what to experiment with, we might have had an answer by now, and the games going forward may look completely different. I mean, for example, had it been more or less proven that an avatar didn't play a massive role, Engage might not have had one. Or if child units did prove to be the defining factor, then maybe that would become an absolute staple of the series going forward, rather than something only 3 games have now. So far, we've mostly been talking about the series from an out-of-game, real-world perspective, but I also wanted to tackle one more super often discussed what if that pertains to the actual story and lore of a game. What if Fire Emblem Three Houses had a golden route? How would it work, story-wise? Can it even exist? Just to make sure we're all on the same page, a golden route in this sense would mean a story that allows all 4 house leaders, Rhea included, to team up and work together towards a better future for Fodlan. It doesn't necessarily mean they all survive. The story could potentially make, I don't know, Rhea a mandatory death like Rodriguez and Azure Moon, but it's not a golden route if any of them function as the game's villain or antagonist. So, how do you make that work when these guys have such differing opinions on what the right thing is to do? Well, speaking of antagonists, that's at least a question that's easy to answer. It has to be the Agarthans, those who sliver in the dark, surely. They're the only faction all 4 routes have a problem with, it's really the only enemy that could bring them all together. So, in classic storytelling fashion, one option would be to make those who slither in the dark stronger, so strong that the others have no option but to bundle their strengths together in order to save their own hide and people. That's very plain though, it would make the story a lot less impactful, and honestly, it would make Three Houses a much less enjoyable game. Something this simple, this good versus evil, could only work as some sort of DLC, New Game Plus kind of route. So let's try again. We want a golden route that is actually fun to play, even if it is your very first playthrough. That means another idea I had, where Byleth canonically plays the story 4 times and uses time travel shenanigans to learn from their mistakes and unites all factions, also doesn't work, because that too would require all 4 routes to be played beforehand. So, how do we make it all work? Well, let's begin by focusing on what all 4 parties have in common. All 4 have the intentions of the people in mind, and in essence, strive for peace and prosperity. That may sound obvious, but it's really not. Those who sliver in the dark, for example, don't, as do many other antagonists over the course of the series. Rhea and Edelgard may also serve that role here depending on the route, but if you really get down to summarizing it, they essentially want the same thing, they just disagree on how it has to be done. I mean, if Dimitri can work with Claude, and they can both work with Rhea, and Claude can work with Edelgard, then you would think it has to be possible for them to at least talk and work together for the greater good. The only problem is, what would they be fighting? You could have them squabble among each other, like actual politics, but then you'd hopefully be left with very little battlefields to fight on, so that doesn't work. We need an enemy for them all to rally behind, and it has to be something more nuanced than the undeniably evil Agarthans. We could potentially use Rhea for this purpose, which would then technically not make it a pure 24-karat golden route, but it would definitely work in a more interesting way than those who sliver in the dark. Especially since by far the biggest visionary gap is between Edelgard and Rhea. It's only really at the end of Silver Snow that I could see Rhea accepting Edelgard's vision as an option worth discussing. But don't forget, we have another Rhea to work with, if you get what I mean. What if the antagonist of the golden route was Byleth? Especially if that were to happen after the time skip, so after they've all had a chance to build a relationship with them and have their positive influence take a hold of their messed up personalities, I think it is probably the best solution for the antagonist problem, again, under the pretense we don't want to use those who sliver in the dark too much. Hell, it may even give Rhea and Edelgard something to bond over, their love and now feelings of betrayal or loss for Byleth. Now, obviously, the problem remains that it's hard to see a way to make Byleth a villain without mind controls or replacement shenanigans, seeing as they are completely devoid of personality and thus opinions. But perhaps we could take some inspiration from Three Hopes there, where Byleth is often overridden by sophists, turning them into a sort of semi-villain in the way they oppose Shez. Here, Byleth isn't actually fighting the bad fight, but from the perspective of Shez, it does appear that way. Something like that could also be possible in Three Houses, although I do admit finding a motivation for Byleth or Sophis to turn Rhea against them is not easy. The only thing I could think of is that making it so that for the first half of the game, Byleth and Rhea grow so close, much closer than they do in the actual game, making it so Rhea would take them over Sophis and look for ways to bring Byleth back, thus opposing her own mother. And as you may be able to tell, the answer to what if Three Houses had a golden route is not easy in the slightest. At least if you aim to not destroy the narrative nuance Three Houses had and replace it with good versus evil. Which I guess is an answer in its own right. If Three Houses had a golden route, it would probably be a weaker game or have said route as a bit of a last hurrah, not the main focus. But that's how I feel. How do you see a golden route going? And what do you think would have happened if Kaga never left or Awakening didn't sell as much? Share it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and subscribe to the channel to stay updated on all my future Fire Emblem content coming up. For now, thanks for watching and enjoy the rest of your day.